My name is John Mendez, and I am your host. Welcome to Walk to Wealth, where I motivate and inspire people new to the world of personal finance by letting you all in behind the scenes of someone who's still on his way. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Walk to Wealth podcast. If you're tuning in on any of the podcast directories or if you're tuning on YouTube, just do us one quick small favor. Just refer us to a friend. You know, we're providing a lot of value with these episodes, and I'm bringing on a lot of special guests. So if you find any value from this episode at all, make sure to tell a friend. Without further ado, Joe, for anyone that may not know you, tell us about yourself. You know, what's your elevator pitch? What do you do?
Sure. So thanks for having me, John. I'm an executive coach, and I've been one for 13 years. I was an HR person prior to that. I was with Merrill Lynch for 26 years. And 7 years ago, I built a second coaching practice, spinning it off from my executive coaching practice to help people focus on the non-financial side of retirement, which very simply means when you have the resources to not work full-time anymore, figuring out what you want to do, not just how you want to invest your money, but how do you want to invest your time. And so helping people plan for their future. I use a process I'm trained in called Designing Your Life, which was developed by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans at Stanford. And it helps people use the principles of design thinking to really map out their next 5 years creatively and expansively.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, Joe, before your long career, and before you started giving back to people, where did this whole journey of yours begin? Where did it start back when you were, take the time travel machine back to my age? How did this all start?
So for me, it starts really, I grew up in the Boston area, so that is where my sports allegiances still lie. But went to college at our state university, similar to you, UConn. I went to UMass, University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and I was a psych major. So I figured out what I want to do with psychology. I was interested in selection, so I started off on Wall Street in recruiting. I worked for a company Dean Witter, later acquired, in 5 World Trade Center back then when that existed. And really had a series of jobs, moved to Merrill Lynch 3 years into my career, and had a succession of jobs, moving from recruiting then into being an HR generalist. And at a certain point in the year 2000, I had a coach because I was getting promoted, had a bigger job, and they gave me this thing called an executive coach, which I didn't really have any idea of what it was. But she worked with me for about a year, a little over a year, because I must have been a hard case. And I really learned to really maximize my leadership abilities. It helped me, it helped my team, and it helped the organization we supported. So I could begin to see the ripple effects. And I became curious about why did this change happen? It made me a better leader, and became curious about what is it that this executive coach did? And I decided that's what I wanted to do after my HR career. So when Merrill Lynch was acquired by Bank of America, I hung around for about 6 months, and then I decided, well, if I am serious about coaching, why not do it now? I've got the unique opportunity to take early retirement, which I did, and I went back to school. So I went back to school, did a master's in executive coaching, did a 1-year program at Columbia University on coaching. One was theory, Columbia was practice. And then later I went back to school again, did a 3rd master's degree in gerontology at the University of Southern California, which is about the aging process, because even you are getting older each and every day. And so I hadn't been old before, so I figured it might come in handy. But I wanted to understand how really people need to plan for not just their next role, but their life ahead.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, a lot of people at first glance might think, why are we talking about retirement? It's called Walk to Wealth. It's usually for people in the beginning of the journey. And the main reason I wanted to bring you on, Joe, especially to talk about this, what we're going to talk about now as we start getting into it, is that a lot of people I see personally in my age demographic, and I'm still Gen Z, and then right above me, the millennials, is that the FIRE movement, financially independent, retire early. Everyone talks about FIRE. Everyone says, oh, I'm going to have $10,000 a month passive cash flow so I can, retire early and go do whatever I want to do. And, I have people that I know personally that, retired early, very, very early, and, went to go travel the country. And then 3 months later are like absolutely bored to, beyond their wildest, dreams. They are massively bored because it's like your entire purpose, everything that you built up, everything your routine, everything that you were working towards is just out the window. And humans, it's part of like the human condition is we have to, strive towards something. And if you retire early, however fast you plan on going in your walk to wealth, you're going to have to plan for that other side as well, because there's going to come a day, whether that's at 25 or maybe it's 75, but there will come a day where it's like, hey, I don't really want to do this anymore. I don't want to keep on working hard. I want to, relax. And it's like, it's only so much relaxing you could do with no plan before it's like, okay, what am I doing with my life?
One of my clients who was in his late 40s said to me on that point, he said, our financial planner, financial advisor told us that I could finally retire early. And I've worked so hard to hit my number. When I finally did, I felt like the dog who was chasing that car and finally caught it. What do I do now? And it really does. I think it's even more important if people are looking at retiring early. How are you going to invest that time? Because it's a long span of time. And with people I work with who leave a career and retire, and I talk to them about, what do you miss? What do you miss about work? And they say, well, I don't miss my boss. I miss the people, most of them. But what I really miss is the challenge. Work gave me a sense of challenge. It pushed me a little bit, helped me grow, got me out of my comfort zone. And that's the big thing I think that I write about in my book is people need to realize that after you retire, no matter what age, you don't stop growing. And you've got to get yourself out of that comfort zone, find things in different ways. And it can be fun things, but things that are going to give you challenge and really help you continue to grow, learn, and achieve.
Yeah, definitely. And I like that you mentioned that, because I know for myself that, I came to the realization this year that I never want to retire. I just want to love what I do so much that it never feels like work. And that because it doesn't feel like work and it energizes me and gets me going, I can just keep on doing it. But even still, there's going to come a point in time where it's like, no matter how much I love something, maybe my body might not be able to keep up with it after a certain point in time. I can't keep playing basketball forever. I can't keep, playing football forever. I just, there's going to be a time where it's like, I may not even be to podcast forever, because by the time I'm, get to a point where it's like, I'm going to say one word a minute and can't speak.
Well, I will tell you, I tried to play basketball forever. So I was playing, I remember this distinctly. I was playing in a corporate league right when I turned 40. It's actually right not too far from here. And I remember the day distinctively. I could still shoot. They actually had a box and one on me in the first half and a triangle and two in the second half. But I lost a step and a half, and I was getting dunked on. And I said, okay, this is not fun anymore. But I tried to play as long as I could. Shifted to running marathons after that. But I think it's a point about, you want to do things you love, and I find people that I work with want to keep some version of work in the mix, but on their own terms. So they're doing a portfolio of things. Some things for fun, some things that are work related, purpose driven in some ways, and some things that really keep them in a position where they can give back to others. So, finding ways, I call it a multi-purpose retirement, where they're not just looking for one thing. And it's not just all about kicking back, Netflix, and chill. It's a mix of things that keep them growing, keep them engaged.
Yeah, and from what you've seen, because you've coached tons of clients. What are some of the main negative or main cons that you see from people who do retire, and like your typical hey, I'm done with work, I'm not doing anything type of retirement? What do you see as your main concerns, main problems that they face when they're retiring, they have nothing to do?
There's a lot of challenges, and the good news is you can replace some of the things that we get from work beyond the paycheck. So, for example, some of the main problems are, all of a sudden the structure is totally up to you. When you're working full time, your days are structured, your week's structured. You look forward to Saturday and Sunday, and the old expression, when you retire, every day Saturday, quickly becomes, well, every day Saturday, and it loses that special feeling to it. So structure is the first one. The next one is status. People have jobs, have a title, work for company, something, they ascribe some to that. And then the third one's identity. Especially with us men types, we tend to think of who we are as what we do. But we're always more than our business card, more than our title. And so you can find different ways to do that. And then the other one, and this also hits men often more than women, is social connectivity. A lot of times we have more professional connections and relationships from our work than outside of work. Sometimes women have an edge. They have a broader social network that goes beyond their work. and they see themselves as more multidimensional people. But those are big ones. You can put them in you can find ways to replicate them, replace them in different ways. But the biggest one I see is sometimes all or nothing thinking, a lot of these cognitive biases. And the way all or nothing thinking comes out in retirement is, I'm either going to work full-time or I'm going to retire full-time. But there's this whole middle ground that's there that you can miss, meaning I can do some work, I can work and take a sabbatical and come back. There's other options that people explore, and I think that's what I call the Goldilocks solution, where you're looking for some combination that's just right, but it doesn't have to be all full-time or nothing.
Yeah, and so how can you set yourself up for someone that's earlier on in the journey so that, because I said, you said work for more than just a paycheck, right? How important is it now at, people from my age to find something that they genuinely enjoy and something that they can at least see themselves doing for a long-term time? Because as you know, it's hard to plan out for, more than a year. It's hard to plan out. More than 5 years, it's almost impossible to plan out. So it's like, how would someone in my shoes try to find something? Because it's like, one, most of us, don't have the most experience. A lot of people my age are either graduating just now, or
Sure.
maybe they're starting up their own business. How would they set themselves up now so that problem never comes, into fruition down the line?
Sure. So I'll give you my honest advice on this. And by the way, you're spot on with the 5 years. You can't plan for 5 years. We all learned certainly from 2020 on that you can't plan too far ahead, and you've got to be flexible and adaptable. But when I work with people, regardless of what stage they're at, most of the people I work with are in their 40s, 50s, or 60s, but I do some early career and mid-career stuff too occasionally. And I use a process I'm trained in called Designing Your Life, created by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans at Stanford. They wrote a best-selling book, New York Times bestseller, in 2016 called Designing Your Life. I would highly recommend the book. You can do the process I coach people through by yourself. I've had people who are Stanford alums who came to me, work with me, and after 3 months said, I bought the book. I went out to California with the seminar with the co-authors, and they were terrific. But I could never really get anything going until I work with you because of the accountability. But you can do it yourself, but you got to not just read the book, you got to do the exercise in it and follow a process. What it does is it helps you map out 3 alternative visions of future you over the next 5 years. You can do that at 25, you can do it at 65. And at any point along the way in between. And really what it does is it uses the principles of design thinking, meaning Bill Burnett is one of the ones who worked at Apple, get this, designing the first laptop. He wrote an article about the other day about how they were trying to figure out where to put the trackpad and where to put the mouse, etc. But it's the same principles that they used in designing the first laptop that you can use in designing your own future going forward. And you do that by really starting with what are your values, what are the things most important to you, and then using some really idea generation techniques like mind mapping, which is a version of brainstorming, and then this looking at 3 alternative ideas of you, and then testing it, prototyping it as you would a new software product or a new physical product. And that's through conversations. Those conversations are simply targeting people and talking to people who are doing what you might like to do. So having conversations. If you want to do a podcast, for example, I did this when I started my podcast. I'm sure you did. Talk to people who started podcasts. What's it like? What do you love about it? What's hard? What's challenging? What takes up your time? When I decided I wanted to write a book, which came out of this Designing Life process when I was being trained by them in San Francisco in 2019, I talked to people who've written books because I'd never done that before. What was that like? And get to learn more. So you can do the same thing with what you might want to do next. But the genius in 3 alternative visions of you, there are multiple versions of us, potentially, they think, is you get to explore and expand your ideas. I could do A, I could do B, I could do C. I interviewed someone recently who, as an example, people have done different things. One who was an outfielder for the New York Yankees. I'm a lifelong Red Sox fan, so that was hard. But
I bet it was.
He actually was a victim of a Ponzi scheme and lost all his money as a pro baseball player. So he ended up taking that adversity, turning it into a second career. He got smart about his money, how to manage it, and became a CFP. And that's what he does today, and runs his own firm. And a lot of people I talk with, I find they can do multiple things. It's just mapping out what could you do, and then talking to people who are doing that thing and finding out, is it right for you?
Yeah, definitely. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about too, because as you know, a lot of people my age, we're at a point in time where it's like we're still like in that phase where some of us may not still be in full on adulthood, so we still have the the potential, the limitless potential that we have, and limitless creativity. And there's so many different things and routes that we can go down. What would you say to someone who's kind of like still in that phase where it's like, I could go this way, but it's like, I like this, and 3 is just not enough. What would you say to someone in that position that just has so many different routes they could potentially go down, and they're just stuck on the fence, not going down any?
So I think there's two processes I'd recommend. One is Designing Your Life. I recommend the book. There's a lot of videos online. You can take a course at Creative Life with the authors. It's very inexpensive, but it's a great process. Can't recommend enough. Second one, you can also find online. It's a Japanese philosophy and process called Ikigai, I-K-I-G-I. And it really takes a look at what are the things that you love to do, and where is there a need in the world, and where will people pay for things, and trying to find that intersection of things. So I think that those processes are similar in that you want to find things that you love, things that you can, if you're at the stage where you're still in the earning years, can make money. And then I like the Designing Your Life practice of talking to people who are doing it to get a really good idea. You'll find in those conversations when you talk to people doing certain things that it'll lead to opportunities. So back in the day, in my time, we would call it informational interviewing. Now they call it prototyping. But you can really have a conversation with someone. I've had people approach me, what's it like to be a coach? How would you do that? I've talked to people about, again, podcasting, writing books. There are people who actually would love to talk to you, but the key is not to talk about you. It's to interview them about their story. How did they get there? What do they love about it? How did they really get good at what they do? And by talking to them about them, people love to talk about themselves and don't get a chance to do it very often. Over time, they'll turn their attention to you. So tell me more about what you're doing. And have you ever thought about doing something like that here? Or have you ever thought about talking to so-and-so? You come up with some good ideas. So get out and talk to people. Dave Evans from Designing Life calls it, to really tell your story, talk to people, and then be willing to experiment. Be willing to try some things on a smaller scale before jumping all the way in. You might be doing one thing. You might create a, quote unquote, as the kids say today, a side hustle to test something out. Is this something that you want to do without going all in yet? And again, continue to talk to other people who are doing it and see if it's right for you and see if it has the legs that you think it might.
Yeah, definitely. There's something similar that I heard. I'm not called I don't think it's called Ikigai, but it may have a similar idea. Pretty much, it's like there's only so much that you can know, there's so much that you can have, and there's so much that you can do. And it's that same triangle kind of, essentially same concept. And what you need to do, or what the path you have to take, is the combination of those three. Because you can't just, no matter how much time you have on this earth, you'll never learn all the things that there is to know. No matter how much time you have on this earth, you'll never be able to acquire even the highest. I think Elon has the highest net worth. It's like that's still just a fraction of the entire global GDP, right? It's like, and then no matter how much time we have on this earth, you'll never be able to do everything this planet has to offer. And so you have to find some type of intersection and kind of like sacrifice, some routes for pursuing the route that you love or you may find the most interesting. And I also like the idea that you said that people like telling their stories, and I feel like people don't understand this enough. When I tell my podcast, how do I start and I didn't realize this until you brought it up, but all my podcast interviews start, tell us about your walk to wealth, every single one. And if you check my transcripts, it does this little cool feature where it shows me the percentage of the speakers and how much they talked in the transcript. If you look at the percentages, most of the time it's like 80% them, 20% me. And so it's like exactly what you're saying.
That's a sign of a great podcaster. My wife's favorite compliment that someone gave me on my podcast was, she said, "I love your podcast. You don't say very much." what the person was getting at is, give the guests, space and time to tell their stories. But you can learn a lot. You can learn a lot from talking to people, giving them space to tell their stories, and it'll make them more likely to help you.
Yeah, definitely. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about going into your story. I know the Design Your Life process kind of, really revolutionized your life. What kind of headspace were you at that point in time where you did get that executive coach, and then that led to, you getting into, the Design Your Life process, reading the book, taking the courses? What framework was your mindset running at that point in time before? And then at what point in time, during or after, did you start to self-reflect and realize that, hey, like, the way I see everything is starting to change and I'm starting to see so much success?
Sure. So I think at the point I had, a 30-year career. So I was very, very fortunate and grateful for the opportunities I had a good run. And I was really curious about this new field, about doing something different. I had done one thing for 30 years and you get good at it. And I was like, what this thing I think I could do, but I wanted to learn. So I actually, ironically, my head was around curiosity, headspace was curiosity. So I asked the question, well, I don't have 30 more years to learn this new thing, executive coaching. So how could I get good at it faster? So my brain went to school, so I did that. And then I had an opportunity to write a thesis, which I only did it once. I did it one time before. And I said, well, how can I use this? So I asked the question, who's really good at this that I could talk with? This is before Design Your Life. So I set up my thesis to, satisfy my curiosity about what do the best people do. So I interviewed, this pre-COVID, obviously. So I did back when we used to do things face-to-face. So for 6 months, I traveled and interviewed a lot of the top coaches in the U.S. and U.K. This is a great experience. So people like Marshall Goldsmith, who was generous with his time, spent a half day with me at his house in San Diego. Two great coaches in London, Jenny Rogers and Peter Haddon, same thing. People very generous to share their time. Gave me a major leg up. So I interviewed them formally and then wrote about it, about how they got to where they got to, what their lessons learned. And that gave me a real head start. So my headspace was, how can I give back? How can I help other people grow as people help me grow in my career? And then the retirement coaching, the what do you want to do with the rest of your life coaching that I started 7 years ago, that came from a client. I was hired by an asset management company to coach the successor to the CEO. And halfway through the process, my client said to me, this has been great. It's the best professional development process I've been through. But it's taught me I don't want to be the CEO. He was 52 at the time. The CEO was in his 70s. He said, I want to really retire early at 55. Can you help me? I said, well, I can't because they're paying me to do this. But let me see what resources I can find for you. Long story short, he ended up retiring early at 55. And that gave me exposure to some tools. It started to come up more and more. Clients started to ask me, hey, I don't want to be here when I'm in my 50s. Can you help me figure out how I can start to get on nonprofit boards so I can do some different things when I turn 50? And so I said, well, let me see what I can do. And so I saw the need, and I developed a second thing. And that's when I went back to school again, because I wanted to really learn more about the aging process, to get the life cycle. It's really starts young. One of my professors said aging starts at birth, actually before birth. So understanding how things unfold is good. But my mindset was curiosity and desire to help others. And then third, how do I leverage what I learned in some different ways?
Yeah. And so from that, I wanted to ask you a little bit too, because I mean, I'm not the type of person that gets fear or feels like the phone is heavy when it comes to reaching out to complete strangers, but especially successful complete strangers. What advice would you give to someone so they don't come off as looking like asking, as you can't withdraw from a ATM that you never deposited in, right? So it's like, how do you reach out to someone that you don't know at all, that is also happens to be very successful in the field that you want to strive in? What advice would you give there?
Sure. So I can just share what I learned there, and I learned it in a very specific context. So I'll make sure I'm clear about that. I once read a blog by Tim Ferriss, love his blog, love his podcast, and he had talked early before the 4-Hour Workweek book that he wrote about how he became fearless about reaching out to anyone and just really, emails and things like that. So what I found is that I reach out to people in the specific context of recruiting guests to my podcast. And I have a range of guests. I have a lot of authors. I have a lot of interesting people. And I just learned to really study their work, and flattery helps. So if I found something that I liked, I'd call it out. But I'd also try to connect it to what's relevant to them. Like, why would this particular thing help them? And I think it's just getting comfortable with doing it, controlling what you can control, which is making the outreach, and then the results happen what they are. You may not hear back from some people I don't, but more often than not, you get a response. So I think just targeting it right, not making it about you, making it about them, goes a long way.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to ask you too, that I'm curious about, because you had a very successful career and you were able to pivot pretty quickly and find success. As you know, people, just as humans, we don't like change. We like, structure. We like routine. We like having things that are predictable. So what advice would you give to anyone really about, pivoting and, being okay with change, no matter what age they're in or what stage in their career they're in?
Sure. One of the coaches I interviewed during that thesis I wrote, traveling around talking to people, was in Washington, D.C. Great coach. He wrote a book called The Next Level, Scott Ablin. And he's out in California, Santa Monica now. But he had a book called The Next Level. And one of his core concepts I often use and share with people, and that's when you're moving into anything new, you want to focus on what you need to pick up, what you need to learn, and also what you need to let go of. And I think that's with change like that, especially change where you don't have any control of, what do you need to let go of? And what do you need to look forward and start planning out that future? So you talked about the ratio of how much you talk versus your guests. What's the ratio of your thoughts versus the past and the future? When you're in that pivot point, you want to have as much looking forward as possible. You don't want to ignore the past, but you don't want to get stuck in it. You don't want to wallow in it. I'm working with a client now who's working through something like that with a sudden change in role, and it's about that, making that mindset shift, looking ahead and putting one foot in front of the other, taking those small steps that are going to move you in the direction you want to go. Yeah,
there's a saying too, like it's like a metaphor, kind of like a analogy. There's a reason why the front window in the car is a lot bigger than the rear view. It's because you should be looking forward. You should be looking at what's in front of you. And so also too, I want to ask you. A lot of people think as well that the traditional way of life, I guess you could say, could kind of be split into like three main categories. It's they go to school, and then they work, and then they retire, and that's it. And their growing pretty much stops at that school, whether that's they leave in middle school, or they drop out of high school, or they finish college, or they go to post grad. But after that, the last year of their formal education, a lot of people tend to just halt all their self-improvement, self-development education right then and there, and just get out into the workforce, and they just pretty much slave their lives away. What would you tell to anyone who thinks that they're already done with school, they don't need to keep on reading or keep on learning?
Sure. So I would actually just share what I learned from someone I interviewed, and it's another example of sending an email to someone that you don't know and don't really think there's much chance they'll talk to you. But there was a very good book that came out maybe about 6-7 years ago called The 100-Year Life. And it was co-written by Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott. Andrew Scott's with the London School of Economics, I think. And basically talked about that traditional three-part model. Go to school, go to work, retire. Totally changing. It's really now going to be more interspersed. There's times where you're going to be working, then there's times where you're going to be relearning, and then times where you're going to take off and go back in. So I think the other field that has contributed to this is the neuroscience, which has learned neuroplasticity. We continue to learn and grow and create new brain cells and neural pathways as we age, much later than people thought. So you really have to have that growth mindset that Carol Dweck talks about, the Stanford person, in terms of looking at what can I learn, how can I continue to grow? And that includes things that are professional and outside of that. One of the things I discovered in researching for my book was work that a researcher in Canada did, Robert Stebbins, on something called serious leisure. I became curious about that. What's that? How can you be serious about fun? But he studied for years things people do that they get really into. Think of any interest you have and something you get really into, because there's a couple of things. You're going to start as a beginner, but there's different levels, and you can progress to levels of mastery. It's a great thing to have on the side. So it may not be something, a side hustle for profit. It might be something you're just really interested in to do for fun. It can be athletic. In my case, it was first basketball, then marathon running. Both ended by injuries. And you move on to the next thing. But there could be artistic and creative pursuits. It could be different types of hobbies. But what people discover is one thing. You keep learning. And the second thing is there are other people out there who love that just as much, if not more, than you do. And so you start to find a new tribe of people who are really into it. The other thing I discovered is a woman in Europe, Emilia Bunea, Bunea, who is a former CEO and then turned academic. She did a study of CEOs, and she found that those who had cultivated serious leisure performed better because they had something in their life besides work that they were getting satisfaction from and interest in, and gave them an outlet. So I think in regards to what age you're at, cultivate those things outside of work that you could do. I did that in my case. I played competitive basketball throughout my career, and then at age 40 started running marathons. Did that up until 57 when I tragically broke my left hip with a half mile to go in the Boston Marathon after it took me 12 races to qualify. But it was a serious pursuit, a serious interest, and it was a good example. And so find something for you. It could be, again, it could be for some people it's writing, it could be drawing, painting, etc. All kinds of artistic pursuits are in there. Could be just things you like for fun, but it's not passive. It's something active. And I think that's a good thing at any age to get involved in.
Yeah, definitely. That's kind of why I started this podcast. It was a passion project that kind of, it started from an idea, me and my friend just having deep conversations. And then he, I scheduled it online, but I still kept wanting to run with it. And now it's like on a point where it's like, it's really starting to grow. And I love that you say, to pick up, something, a serious leisure, something that you do on the side. But for some people, that sounds, it may sound kind of counterintuitive. It's like, so you're telling me I will get better at my main focus, whether that's your job, your business, or whatever, by focusing on something else. What would you tell to someone who can't kind of grasp the topic of, how would I get better at something by diverting my time to something else instead of diverting more time into that one thing?
Sure. So there's two schools of thought in this. One is that I'm really specialized, right? So I'm going to do this thing professionally, and I'm going to be the best at it. And that a lot of people do that, and they're very successful. By having some other thing you're doing on the side for fun and getting good at, it can make you sharper because you're not thinking about work 24/7. You're not thinking about that thing that you do all the time. So that's one. Second thing is that really people are multidimensional. You can be really good at your field, at your profession, at your job, but you also have this other side that you're cultivating, developing, and tapping into. Because this goes back to some old sayings: all work and no play makes Johnny a dull boy or girl. So I think that's one. Secondly, work is all consuming, and you can work 24/7. I am in a phase where I'm super busy. Just last night, my wife ran into friends of hers and they were just talking about, boy, I think Joe's working too much. I don't understand why he's working so much now. I said, how did this come up exactly? And one of my wife's friends said, he should be taking his advice from his own podcast. But so you can always keep working. But if you have these other activities, it makes you well-rounded. I think it can help you. It can help you devote more attention when you come back to the work focus to be sharper, as opposed to the draining effect of thinking about it 24/7.
Yeah, definitely. And people fail to realize that there is that school of thought where it's like, especially in hustle culture, it's like you just gotta grind all day, every day. Wake up 6 a.m., go to sleep midnight, and just grind the entire time. And it's like, there's some, very, very small percentage of people that are actually wired in a way where that's possible for them. Like that's actually doable without actually affecting their health. But for the vast majority of us, we have to take some time to learn how to take our foot off the gas all the time. There's red lights in life. There's yellow lights in life as well. It's never, you're not on the highway your entire life.
And I'll share a quick story that may illustrate that in a different way. And that's I had this goal when I turned 40 that I wanted to run a marathon, and then that I want to qualify for my hometown Boston Marathon. You have to hit a certain time. It's adjusted by age. And it's not easy to do. And so I ran a bunch of races, and I reached a certain point where I said, my times are getting better, and I got it to a point on myself with training plans I could. And then I said, well, how can I get it down even further? And I thought, well, I'm a coach. I believe in coaching. I see the value. So I decided to hire a running coach. And here's what the running coach did. He took my training plan, and he made 2 changes. And there were tweaks, and they made all the difference in the world. One was I was running 6 days a week. He changed it to 5. And I fought that. I said, run less? How could that help? But it did. And then he changed what I do with my long runs on Sundays when I'd be going out running 20 milers. But he was like, no, you're going to break them into intervals, and you're going to run part of them really hard. But the counterintuitive work less, run less made me better. And I ended up beating the qualifying time by almost 5 minutes, which I never thought I could do. I thought I'd just make it by like 30 seconds. But it turned out to be fortuitous because the year I qualified, you had to beat the time by like 2 minutes and 48 seconds or you wouldn't get in. So I think that sometimes doing less can really be more. It can make you much, much better because it's not always about the volume, about the hours, it's about the quality.
Yeah, definitely. And I was just going to touch on a point as well. It's like, it's not about the hours you put in, it's about what you put in the hours. And a lot of people don't realize that if they were just more productive, and I forgot where I seen this quote, but it's like, this one guy was talking about how like he studied like, extremely, top successful business owners. And if you've seen how hyper efficient their days were, it's like, I think Elon Musk has his days like blocked out in 5-minute intervals. And it's like, if they don't get what they had to get done in those 5 minutes, it's on to the next task. They can't hold up, trying to complete it. It's like next thing. And it just become so optimized because some people time block, some people, schedule themselves differently, but it's like everything is purposeful and intentional. And that's how they get the most out of each and every day. And they're able to, reach these heights that most people can only imagine, like dream of. Some people can't even dream of reaching these heights because they're so, so down bad. And so, you have to really work on, as you said, becoming productive and spending your time wisely and the quality of work that you do when you're on so that you could be off when you're off and then leisure seriously.
Exactly. And define it for yourself, because what works for some of the person, especially people you read about often, that may not work for you. What is it for you? How do you define success? How do you define leisure? What's fun for you? What's the right mix? What's the right recipe and combination for you?
Yeah. And then another thing I wanted to ask you about is because, as you know, when it comes to trying to become successful, no matter how much, I guess effort or time or quality of your hours that you put in, it's very hard to reach that when you're taking things from a safe approach. And you sometimes you have to make leaps of faith. Sometimes you have to step out of your comfort zone, or else none of these things will ever kind of happen. And I want to get your advice from someone who's on the other side. How can one reach success while stepping out but not risking it all, but also trying to maneuver, because it's hard when you don't know what's on the other end?
Absolutely. So I think what I've observed and experienced over the years is that if you look at how are people paid? People make more if they do something more difficult or do something that others don't want to do. And so sometimes bad times create opportunity, crisis creates opportunity. Things when people want to not go toward it or not go to that sometimes can be the best play to do it. But you got to just, if you want to be successful, you got to do some things that are hard that others can't do or don't want to do. That's what I see. There aren't many things that are easy that pay well. So it's either about the skill and expertise you can acquire, or doing something that others shy away from because of the difficulty or the hours or the commitment or whatever it may be. So finding that sweet spot that works for you, and back it's what we talked about before, defining it in the context of your whole life. Is it just about the success? Is it just about the money right now? Or is it a more balanced approach that you're really looking at? So I think that's where it all starts, is what's success for you at this period in your life, defining that for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like a lot of people start off aimless and hope, think that, it's going to one day just fall onto their lap. Like, oh yeah, my life purpose is just going to, I'll figure it out when I find it. And it's like, that strategy doesn't work virtually in any path of life. You have to take some time and actually reflect, because if you don't know what you want, if you don't take the time to define success, define what these certain things look like, if it smacked you in the face, you wouldn't be able to tell, because it's like you never defined it in the first place. And so you're letting little opportunities, fall right in front of you because you never took the time to, and it doesn't have to be a whole, weekend getaway workshop where you focus. It can just be 5 minutes, just reflect at the end of the day, or journal a little bit or something, meditate maybe, where it's like you kind of define these things. And so I want to ask you as well, what kind of things that you can do to help people, what kind of advice you can give to help people kind of take a step back and really define these things for them? Because it's like success, as you know, looks different for everyone. And as you can tell by probably all the clients you work with, even though it's all kind of post-retirement, but it's like even all those can look very, very different. So how do you go about kind of defining yourself? I know you said design your life, but before you design that, you got to kind of define the general things for like, what is success? What is these things? So how do you go about doing that?
Yes, sure. So I would look at this question in the designing your life context, because they've figured it out in my experience. So I think it's a good tool. And if they start with that exact thing, they take a look at a dashboard that's in the book, which really looks at 4 areas of your life: health, work, love, meaning relationships, and play. And it looks at like a gas tank, a gauge from empty to full. Take stock. Where are you in all those 4? And then you do a revised version of the future. Where do you want to be? And where are those gaps? So it starts there. Then you look at what gives you energy and what detracts energy. So I think really looking at those things, which are priority, because sometimes actually play isn't really, fun isn't exactly number 1, but maybe it needs to be moved up on the list. Most of my clients, they've been at a place where work has been high, relationships have been high, but maybe they haven't spent enough time working out or taking care of their health, and they usually have found that fun has fallen to the wayside. So it's taking a look at something like that. Use some tool which gets you to step back and reflect. But really, the ultimate question is, what are the things that are most important to you? What's the right mix? What's the right balance? And where are you today versus where you want to be? So the tools can help, but you can do that yourself, just reflecting, where am I today? Where do I want to be? Your point on direction is important. My first boss, when I worked in 5 World Trade Center back in the day, said to me in my first week, you have to be clear on what you're trying to do, because if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And so I think it's really thinking about that 5-year view. Where do I want to be? Backtracking how I want to get there. But it's not going to happen by accident. It's going to happen with intentionality and flexibility as you adapt and go.
Yeah, definitely. There's one analogy. It's like, or saying, it's no one is going to get behind a car that you drive if you don't know where you're going. You have to have the destination. It doesn't have to be the most clear thing ever, but it has to be somewhere, right? One of the other podcast episodes that I interviewed another guest, we were talking about, like, when you put in your GPS, the first step is always, where's the end destination? And then, it gives you, several suggestions, as you said, kind of like the 3 different alternatives. Those are your suggested routes. Each one has like a different ETA. And then you just kind of just find your way, pick one. And as you pick one, let's say life throws a curveball at you, right? You get stumped. You have to divert a little bit. What does the GPS do? It just recalibrates. And then from there, you just kind of just go on about it until eventually you get to that endpoint that you were looking to get towards.
Yes, and you need your own internal version of Waze, because there are going to be construction delays and accidents that are going to navigate around. But it starts with where you're looking to get to and starting small toward that path. And one resource I want to highlight for people, because it's been useful to me, I came across it, and it's a free resource. And that's thinking about how much of what we do are the habits, and the habits that you can build to help you get to where you want to go. There's another Stanford guy by the name of B.J. Fogg. He also wrote a book, another bestseller, Tiny Habits. I came across it in 2014, and a YouTube video he had done. But basically what he does, he takes any aspiration that you want and then breaks it all the way down to the tiniest version. So, for example, when I first used it, I was training for marathons, and I was on Seattle on a business trip and came across it and said, okay, I haven't done sit-ups since high school probably. So I started by doing one sit-up. It's a 3-part process, which I'll explain in a minute. One sit-up a day. I got up to 200 a day eventually, and did the same thing 4 years ago with push-ups. I now do 50 a day. I never think about it. It's not on my list. I don't have to remember. I don't have any yellow sticky notes. It just becomes part of what I do. I got a bunch of those I've built. His 3-part process is this. Start with your aspiration, then get the tiniest version of it. You want to read a book? Read a sentence at first. You want to write a book? Write a sentence. Part 2, you want to anchor it to something you already reliably do. So for me, I bolted the push-up onto something else I do in a stretching routine, and I just added it. And then part 3 is celebrate. You want to really give your brain this message that this is something I really, really want to do. This thing works really well. You can do it for anything. And he has a free resource called at tinyhabits.com, BJ Fogg. It's a 5-day free email course. There are people behind the scenes with it, but you basically design 3 habits in the smallest version. And each day they send you an email with a little bit more of the insights on it and ask if you're going to do it the next day and next day. And it really can make a difference. It can be, you take the biggest aspiration project, break it all the way down, and it gives you that way to start small. But he figured out how emotions create habits. We usually rely on willpower. I'm going to start and I'm going to grit my teeth and get it done. He's re-engineered it to those 3 steps, tiny version, anchor it to something you already do, and then celebrate it to give yourself the inspiration. Highly recommend tinyhabits.com.
Yeah.
I have no ties to him. I've been trained by him as one of their coaches. I use it occasionally in my process. I use it more personally. I have 8 different things I do before I come downstairs in the morning that are tied to these short habits.
Yeah, that's amazing. And a lot of people don't know how to, hacking your dopaminergic system is one of the best things that you could do to, start increasing success. Because not only is, dopamine the feel-good hormone that everyone thinks of, but it's also what makes you strive for things. It's because it knows that you're going to receive something. So that celebration part at the very end is extremely important. And I want to ask you as well, you have, tons of resources, tons of experience, tons of knowledge, and you've been doing this for quite some time now. Where could anyone find you at if they want to get more information, want to go more in depth with this, and especially with the Design Your Life process?
Sure. So the best place is my website, retirementwisdom.com. I have a second one, Princeton Executive Coaching for the leadership coaching, but retirementwisdom.com, you'll find the programs there. Designing Your Life, I do one-on-one and a few times a year, and we'll have one starting in October. I do it in groups of 10, small group coaching process together virtually. People go through it. It takes 5 sessions together, plus I do one-on-one session at the beginning and one at the end, and go through the whole process, include the book with it, but you go through all the exercises, all the tools, but you learn from others while going through it together, a lot of breakout groups, etc. So those are the 2 ways. So it's retirementwisdom.com, and that's the best way to see what we do.
All right, that's amazing. And now it's time for the final 4 questions, as all the guests know, where I ask all my guests the same 4 questions. So for any new guests, if you're listening to this, don't cheat. Stop the episode now. But for all my listeners, stay tuned. So question number 1, what is the most impactful lesson that you learned in life?
That working hard eventually pays off if you're willing to be adaptable, persevere, but also be aware of when you need to make changes, when you need to shift, and even sometimes, and this is the hardest one for me, when you need to step aside or walk away. But where you direct your efforts to is really key. apply your work ethic, but choose carefully where you choose to channel it.
Okay. And what is the most admirable trait a person can have?
I think it's, frankly, kindness, being a good person to yourself and others, being willing to help others, but also, being kind to yourself, which we forget all the time. And it's a hard thing to do, but really be the type of person who's going to make someone's day through some small thing. We've forgotten about that, but those little things end up mattering, and you can apply them right away to people in your day-to-day life, and even people you don't know. But just, it doesn't take much to be kind or to be the good person. We're all busy, but just take that extra minute to say thank you, et cetera, et cetera. Do something nice for someone. If you're listening to this, I had one of my podcast guests who started off the podcast by saying, everyone take out their phones and just text someone who you want to say something about how much you appreciate them. So I had to make sure he knew to say, unless you're driving, to do it later. But those little small things matter. We know how we feel when we get them. I think that's the most admirable trait.
Okay. If you wanted to change someone's life with one book, what would you recommend?
I'm not going to go with my predicted answer of Design Your Life because I've already covered that in detail. I actually go back to the Stephen Covey's work, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which people have forgotten about. It came out in the early 90s. I've learned a lot from it and still apply it today as a coach and as a person. I think he figured out a lot of things there that are very applicable because they're principle-based. And I personally learned a lot about it when I listened to him talk about it more than reading the book, just listen to a lot of his recordings. And there's some things I use from that on time management today. For example, he had this thing about if you're managing your time, you want to organize around priorities. And he did that in the visual. He has this concept called big rocks. That if you're managing your week, you manage your day, put the big rocks in first, you can then accomplish a lot more, as opposed to what we usually do.
Put the water in.
Little things taking up our time.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, you pour water. So that Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, is the one I'd recommend.
Final question. What is the legacy that you're trying to leave behind in a few sentences? That
people can do multiple things, that people can grow and develop, and they can help others along the way. And that really, it ain't over till it's over. You can continue learning, growing, and making a difference at any age.
That's an amazing way to end the show. Joe, I appreciate you taking the time to reach out and hop onto the podcast. I know that I definitely learned a lot of things, and the Design Your Life is something that I haven't heard about up until when we first met for our pre-show. So I know that a lot of people are definitely going to find this information valuable at any age group. This is stuff that, no matter where you are in life, it's extremely applicable, and extremely important because as you said earlier, the pandemic taught us don't plan too far out. So
you really can't. And one just quick comment about Design Your Life that I think will help people listening. This is based on a course that was the most popular undergraduate course at Stanford that these two co-authors have taught for, I think it's like 15, 16 years now. They wrote the book because they wanted to broaden it beyond just the Stanford students. And then they brought it further by training coaches like me and others to use it for people at other stages of life. So it really is, it's applicable. It's, again, like Covey's, but it's principle-based, in their case, based on principle design thinking. And it's great at any age.
Yeah. Well, alrighty, Joe. It was a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks so much, John.
Thank you guys for tuning in to today's episode. Again, I am your host, John Mendez. You can find me at JohnMendez_Realtor and at Walk to Wealth on Instagram. Please make sure to subscribe and leave a review if you're loving the podcast so far. New episodes are released every Sunday. Look forward to seeing you guys on the next episode. Take care.